I love instruments of the past. I love the stories that they tell, and the stories that the music tells, and that's an important foundation to be conscious of. But being conscious of that foundation shouldn't prevent you from taking them elsewhere or taking them further, because as you mentioned before, no instrument was actually designed for what it ended up being used as, and that's the musician part of our responsibility, I would say.
Welcome to Life with Strings Attached. I'm your host, Jamie Gale. Today, I'm joined by someone whose curiosity about the guitar has taken him across countries, genres, and generations of musical history, Julien Bitoun. Julien is a guitarist, an author, a content creator, and a lecturer. His work is featured in major French publications, and you may know his books, Les Paul, 70 Years, Guitars and Heroes, Gallagher's Guitars, and Woodstock Live. What I love most about Julien isn't just his knowledge, it's his spirit of exploration. He follows his curiosity wherever it leads, whether he's tracing the cultural geography of the American guitar or creating something new simply because it brings him joy. His career wasn't planned. It unfolded because he kept saying yes, kept learning, and kept playing. Today, we talk about creativity, opportunity, and what happens when you allow adventure, tempered by fear, to shape your path. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Julien, and I hope that you do as much as I did.
Hey,
Julien. Great to see you. Welcome to Life with Strings Attached. Thanks for being on the show.
yeah, thanks very much for having me. I'm still wondering what you're hoping to get out of me.
Oh, you're too modest.
Well, yeah, I think you're overestimating me, but that's another topic.
Come on, we've been talking for close to a decade, I think, at this point in time. Trust me, there are a lot of people who I do not invite on this show because I just can't imagine that I'm going to have an interesting conversation with them. Nice people, they just generally don't have much to say, you know. But I don't remember too many times where words failed you.
Okay, well, that's yet another layer of pressure on me. So yeah, I'm taking it in.
Come on, Julien. You're a writer for many French publications. You've written a few books. You create content. You're an active musician. I mean, you're checking off a lot of boxes there, don't you think?
Yeah, but I would say checking them out clumsily as I go along. Like I never set out to do any of those things properly. It mostly happened because I was passionate about them and didn't think about doing anything else rather than actively going for it, which I don't think is very inspirational.
But perhaps more common than people would think.
Right.
Yeah, I get those questions. How did you end up doing this? My life led this way. Like, it's not like I had this grand master plan at the age of 25 to arrive where I am today. There are opportunities that come your way, and some people say yes, and most people say no, actually. There's a certain amount of sort of adventure and openness that one has to end up doing what you're doing today, and to do the kinds of things that I do today. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think, I would have like two answers to that. Of course, when opportunity arises, you always say yes and work out the details afterwards and learn how to play the mandolin if you lied about being able to do it. But there's also when no opportunity whatsoever arises, and that's most of the time for like real people. And that's when you gotta create your own and do your little thing and hope that it is fun in the process. Because if it all fails or leads to nothing, at least you had some fun in the meantime. And I think that's most of what led me to what I'm doing these days is setting up little things in my little room and not even hoping that people catch up, but just having such fun in the process that other people wanted to be part of it or got interested in it at some point.
You know, I think that you're overly generous to other people. And I don't mean to criticize other people, but I think you're underselling some of your core features. And that is simply that I don't think there's a lack of opportunity in the world for most people, that some people get lucky and other people don't. I mean, don't get me wrong. We don't all get the same opportunities. But generally speaking, I think that people are overly cautious and incurious. And they really feel like they need to know what's going to happen. And if they can't predict a certain amount down the pathway, they just won't go in that direction. And the people who are doing unusual things isn't because they had greater opportunity. It's because they were willing to explore. And I think you're an explorer.
Well, yeah, I'll take that because I never really cared for any kind of safety or backup plan or any of that stuff probably because I had the luxury to think that way, having no family yet and no big responsibility. I was living in a I would not even dare to call it an apartment, but a very small place that didn't cost me anything. So I had the lowest overhead you can think of, and I think that allowed me to take every chance I could. And I think when you're starting out, that's a very crucial point, that you should not think in terms of what's going to lead you where or what's an opportunity or what's something you just want to do and make the difference between the two, because one can become the other very quickly and without you even knowing it before the fact. So yeah, I'll take that.
Again, I think that's a sense of adventure. So I've never bought a home. That's very unusual where I'm from. I don't know about where you are in Paris, if that's unusual. Where I'm from, everyone is trying to have a mortgage, and I have never interested in a mortgage. And the general assumption is in Canada, if you don't have a mortgage, it's because you can't get a mortgage. It's not that you don't want a mortgage. It's that you can't get one. And, you know, one of my best friends also, he's been very successful in the travel industry. He's made serious bank. He's traveled to more countries than I have. And there's not a lot of my friends who have traveled to more than I have. He's traveled to a lot of places in the world, mainly because I'm limited to where people can afford expensive guitars, and he can go to places where that has nothing to do with it. But nonetheless, he also has never owned a home. But he's had this sense of adventure right from right from when he was in high school. Him and his girlfriend went backpacking across Europe. Classic thing to do when you're in university. He did it when he was in high school. And they would save money and go on an adventure. Even after they finished school, they would save money, and then they'd go live in Vancouver for a year or two. Save money, take 3 or 4 months off, and travel around Southeast Asia. He goes into Lonely Planet in Melbourne. For those who remember the Lonely Planet guides, how we traveled the world before there was such easy access with cell phones. And he walked in there and said how much he loved their work and how much he appreciated it. And they said, "What do you do?" "Oh, well, I've helped people get online and help them booking services." And he leaves the office with a 6-figure offer for a job. And next thing you know, he's living in Australia. And he's continued to do this. And now he's roughly my age. He's roughly 50 years old. And he has still also never had a mortgage for a home. Not because he doesn't have the money, because he sees it as, like I do, oh man, I don't want to be tied down. I don't want to be like the golden handcuffs, bound to an area that makes me make choices that keep me less free. And And I think a lot of people would be very nervous with that concept. They want security.
Yeah.
And so you trade opportunity for security.
Yeah, that's true. I did buy a home, and that was a bad idea. I'm currently trying to sell it, and yeah, it's not ideal. Let's say I probably lost a lot of money in the process. So yeah, don't do that, kids. But
I mean, some people make some money. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that no one should ever buy a home, but I'm saying that you do trade off this sort of freedom and your capacity for adventure, let's say, by committing yourself into certain spaces. And then it's I'm not going to do that because the roof needs to be fixed or something of the sort. And I want to renovate. We're renovating our kitchen. I have lots of friends right now who are renovating their kitchens or their bathroom or something of the sort. And so they don't go out into the world and do something else because they're constantly fixing up the nest, if you will. And that's okay. I don't begrudge them for it. But it is a conscious difference.
It's probably also down to what type of person you are. I mean, I'm quite anxious and nervous, as you probably can't tell, because I'm speaking as slowly as I can muster. But I like the security. I like to know that I'm not going to be out in the street because, the times where I've been close to that were not pleasant, and that to me is another kind of freedom also, the freedom to know that you can live in your home and not worry about what tomorrow is going to bring. Not worry about tomorrow is freedom in itself also. So I think it's also different ways of looking at life that brings you to pursue different types of freedom, I would say, because anyway the end result will all be the same for us all. Spoiler alert, but I think it's all
whatever
about.
Do you mean?
Are you sitting down right now? But it's all about what you make of the time that you have in the meantime, and I think there's nothing wrong with seeking that kind of freedom that comes from security, but you have a point in that fewer opportunities will arise that way, or I would say different opportunities rather.
Yeah. So you want the comfort. You claim to be somewhat anxious, but you're also incredibly curious.
Well, look at how tidy that room is around me. That's OCD in person there.
I love it. But okay, so I have read that the part of the brain that regulates anxiety is the same part of the brain that regulates curiosity and exploration. And that's sort of how it finds equilibrium between total chaos and total order. Is it finds this. I actually think that we need to stop using the word anxiety and anxiousness the way that we use it currently, because it's a symptom. It is not the problem.
Right.
The problem is either competence or ignorance. So, and hang on a second, because those words people feel like are very insulting. But when we're anxious about something, it's that we're unsure if we have either the skill to do it or the knowledge to figure it out. Right? And so it's ignorance or competence that we're dealing with. And listen, a really competent person understands that they are both ignorant and incompetent in many areas. So I'm not trying to insult anyone else. Yeah. I have a great deal of ignorance and incompetence. Matter of fact, it's that insatiable feeling to learn and to figure things out that keeps me going. And I'm not trying to totally... oh my God. Life would be over if I conquered ignorance and competence. Can you imagine just being able to do anything and know everything? There's nothing left. Awful.
Yeah, I can't even picture that. And I mean, calling oneself ignorant on the same podcast that hosted Monty Leone and Groon is a very easy task, I'll tell you.
Yeah. That's why I do that. I go find people who know stuff that I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to learn. That's why you're here too, Julien. You have experiences that I don't have, and you have perspectives that I don't have. And it's exploring each other's experiences and ideas and perspectives that makes this life so wonderful for me.
It is.
To engage, to taste a food I've never tasted before, to hear a song I've never heard before, to play guitar that makes me do something I've never done before. That's what gets me going. And so I want to dive into this sort of curiosity and exploration with you, because I think that everyone regulates this way. And not that this is a psychological show. This is a show about life. It's a conversational show, not an interview, where we talk about things and just explore them. And so I have seen you in many countries, because you and I get out there and explore and to do things with guitars. And so we don't bump into each other at some restaurant somewhere in the world. We bump into each other at some guitar show somewhere in the world, right? And so I've seen you in California, I've seen you in Germany, I've seen you in France, so on and so forth. And so it's this stuff that gets you out there, that pursues that question. And you've written some books. I believe, if it's okay that I say, you are in the midst of writing at least one book that I know of currently, something more yet to come.
Absolutely, yes. I have one coming out and in the process of writing another one. So yeah. Pretty busy year, and I liked it. I like it that way.
Yeah. And so, I'll get a message from you and say, hey, Jamie, I'm going to Nashville. I want to explore this topic. Do you know someone in the area who might want to have a conversation or might have something? And I'll say, oh, yeah. Sometimes I'll say, yes, I do. Let me introduce you to this person or this person. And then you go and explore it. And I want to know what happened, afterwards. Like, oh, what's he doing? Where's he going? What did he learn? Did they have a nice conversation? Did he eat any good food? So this book that you have coming out, are you free to talk about it at this point in time? Or?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I want to preface this by saying that from a European point of view, if you're into guitars and guitar music, even though it doesn't mean much, but I would say blues-influenced music, whether that be St. Vincent, Jack White, Queens of the Stone Age, or even mainstream pop that's got plenty of guitar as well. But if you're into that kind of culture, I would say the US and Canada also is kind of the promised land, and you might not realize that because you're drenched in it, but from a European point of view, it's Disneyland with the stuff you actually like. So being able to go to Nashville, being able to meet people with the privilege of being introduced by someone such as you, and which of course is the best way in. It allows you to go past the first impression that you have to make in order to get into the real interesting stuff. Like that person knows Jamie, so they're probably into great guitars, so I'll show them the good stuff and they'll know what this is. And to me that's amazing, because you don't get to see great archtop collections in France. You don't get to see that many actual 52 Les Pauls in France and stuff like that. And it's not every day you get to speak to people who's been working with Vince Gale or Joe Bonamassa or people like that. And that's the stuff I'm living for, and that's the reason why I keep coming to NAMM, because you get all those people that seem normal to you, but are kind of not godlike, but close to gods from my point of view, and that's a big part of it. When when I ran into Ren Ferguson on the Boutique Guitar Showcase booth at NAMM last year, it was kind of a big moment for me, because that's a name I've been reading about for ages, and I've always been fascinated by the way he basically crossed the country several times in service of great quality acoustics, and brought back to life some brands and some ways of doing things, and seems to continue to do that with his family, which is probably what we're all dreaming of to a point. So yeah, I guess those are big moments for me, probably bigger than you could imagine. So that was my preface. The book I'm working on is trying to approach the history of the guitar from a geographic point of view, or on the other, from the other perspective, trying to approach the American geography from a guitar point of view, because I think the two are very closely intertwined. The idea started coming to me when I visited, during the same year, the Martin factory in Nazareth, and the Taylor factory in El Cajon, California, and both are so different in the way they do things, in the way they approach things, in the people that work there, and the landscape surrounding them, and I thought that explains a lot about how the guitars are made, what they sound like, who plays them, and all that. And I think from a European point of view, we tend to think of those guitars as just made in the USA, but that's a really restrictive way of looking at things, because Pennsylvania is definitely a long ways away from California and the Midwest and the South, and all those areas are continents unto themselves, and I wanted to try and grasp some of that and explain some of those philosophies, depending on the landscape surrounding the crafteries and the factories.
Oh, remarkable! Yeah, the landscape, the size of North America is one of those distinctions that is probably equally difficult for people to understand who haven't quite been there or traveled it in the way. When you're in an airplane, it's the difference from one side to the other is a few hours. It doesn't seem like a big deal. I've been in every single state and every province of Canada. I have driven the majority of the inhabited North America, let's say. And I do so almost every year, actually. So I was just in 25 states over 5 weeks.
Right.
Yeah, and I was further north and east than the Martin factory, and I was all the way down in San Diego and El Cajon on that trip. And, I don't know if we overlaid the map, but that's probably like going from France to China. Yeah,
something like that, yeah. At least far inside Russia.
Yes. Yeah. And so... what happens? Yeah, there's so many. I'm very interested in your book and understanding it, because there's a lot of cultural differences, and you know, like you talk about Ren Ferguson. When you set up a factory in Connecticut or in Montana, or down in Nashville, those cultures are distinct enough where they're basically different countries. Within Europe, there's similarities, of course, between the Germans, the Austrians, the Swiss Germans. They're all speaking the same language, but they are distinctly different cultures. And the different culture in New England versus the Northwest versus the American South are as distinctly different as the Austrians are from the Germans as they are from the Swiss Germans. And I don't know that a lot of people fully appreciate that going from one spot to the next, and it does have an effect on the guitar, and it has
I
effect
do think
on,
so.
yeah, the music for sure.
I think, yeah, I think it's it determines even the way you see your factory, like how much CNC you're going to use as opposed to people carving stuff by hand, even down to how clean the factory is going to be. Like, are you okay with wood being on the ground, or do you need the factory to be so clean that you could basically eat on the ground in between breaks? So, I think, yeah, it's going to be a really interesting trip for me to go through that book, and I've already laid out a kind of map of those brands, and some of them I've been going through so many locations that it's also a baggage that they have to deal with, and that determines the way they are today. A brand like Gale, for instance, has been going through so many locations that it's almost kind of lost its identity nowadays, and it's trying to look for it, and I mean, who knows where American guilds are built today, or to a point, who knows where Fenders are being built today, and it, of course, it all depends on what price you're putting for that. But I think some brands are also trying to voluntarily being vague about it. Like, for instance, they've just released that was yesterday, the Tom Morello Arm the Homeless replica, and well, it doesn't say where it's built, and of course, since it's a replica, there's no made in Ensenada or made in Corona written anywhere. You just have to gather from the price that it's probably made in Mexico, but it's right on the cusp of one or the other. So I think that's interesting.
But it can't cross international borders that way. It has to declare where it is, or it can get seized by customs. They're going to have to say it. It has to say it somewhere. Yeah. Where it is another question. But it does. I've actually known guitar makers who were stopped, who they made the guitar, but they had not labeled it where it was made, and it was almost seized by, in this case, American customs entering New York.
Interesting.
And so it's really important that you label a guitar with what it is. And someone like Fender certainly knows that. You wouldn't want an entire ship of guitars that were unlabeled to be seized and destroyed.
Yeah, that's another topic altogether. But I'm fascinated by the way the workarounds that some brands can find. Like,
yes,
some pickups are made in America and not in the USA, which, as we all know, America is not a country. It's kind of part of a continent.
Not everyone knows that. Yeah. But that is the European perspective. So Europeans, because I'm a Canadian, so it took me quite a while to stop correcting Europeans who called me American, because no, I'm Canadian. Because actually, as Canadians, we think of the people from the USA as Americans,
right?
And we distinguish ourselves like, no, I'm not from there. I'm from Canada. That would be like an Austrian person being called German, or a New Zealander being called Australian, because that's just the more famous Big Brother. Right next door, right? and it took me a long time to realize that actually most of my European connections were referring to America as the continents of America, both north and south. And you're right, that opens up a lot based on the fact that many people think that America is the USA.
Right.
So they play towards it. Very interesting observation. I actually didn't realize anyone was calling them just made in America at this point.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure they still do it, but check out some very famous pickups that rhyme with Shimor Schmucken, and you'll see.
That's great. Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop is your premier fretted instrument custom case maker, and we invite you to create a musical instrument case unlike any other, one that's unique to you. Every Cedar Creek custom case is hand-built by highly skilled craftspeople using only select woods, Providence Forge hardware, and premium instrument-friendly materials. At Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop, we are dedicated to helping you design the case of your dreams. Find out more at cedarcreekcases.com. So your book is going to be focusing on the instruments themselves, not the music made on the instruments. Do I understand that correctly? So talking about guitar manufacturing and the American guitar, not, for instance, how blues traveled up Route 66 or the Mississippi River from the south to the north. It's talking about the instrument itself primarily.
Well, it has to be part of it to some extent because of course instruments are what musicians make of them. But I really want it to be about the makers because, well, first of all, it's not an infinite book, so I have to make choices, and it's already been pretty difficult to select some brands over some others because there's so much to tell. So I'm probably not going to be able to cram everything I want to in there, but I do want to interview some musicians more for the experience they've had of some makers rather than from a purely musical point of view. People like James Trussert or Alexander Dumble, people like that who have such a mystique surrounding them, and that are pure products of their either their environment as far as Dumble is concerned, or their their travels and their adventures and their history as far as Trussert is concerned. So people like that will mostly, I think, well, for Dumble, he's not available these days, but people like that will best be described by other people than by themselves, I think, and for that I will try to call upon some musician friends.
Yeah, great. Okay, wonderful. So that's interesting. So I assumed at first it was more from the anthropological sort of approach, where it was about the peoples of the guitars. Of course, you have to have some of that there, as you already said, but focus mainly on the making of the instruments and where they're made and context. Very interesting. And will this be primarily written in French, English, both?
It is in French, and I'm really sorry about it.
Will you translate it?
Usually, when one of my books comes out in original French, it gets translated by a native Anglophone. So. Unfortunately, I'm not that, so they don't ask me. I think I could do it, and I would enjoy doing it, but that's not the way it's done in the publishing business. It usually gets done when it's the other way around, like the Les Paul book or the Rory Gallagher book. I've written in English first, so they asked me to translate them in French after the fact. But yeah, that one I'm writing in French. So if it gets translated, it will be by somebody else. But yeah, I'd love to see that coming out in the US and the UK as well. So yeah, let's keep our fingers crossed. But the book itself is coming out in France for Christmas 26, so that's still a long ways away
so we got some time
for a translation.
Yeah, great. Okay, so you were identifying the differences between the Americas, the music specifically, I think of North America more so than South America, as it's related to the guitar. Versus France. And so would you mind sort of extrapolating on that a little bit for us to help help those from the other side of the ocean say, well, what is it like in France, comparatively speaking, for the guitar?
Well, I really love the one word you used when in discussion with George Gruen, which was not elder abuse, by the way.
Good luck even trying to abuse George. George is a tough guy.
Yeah. He's not a good abusee. Yeah, let's just put it that way.
We have fun together.
But you used one word I very often use myself, and I found a kinship with you on that is cosplay, and I think a lot of French players or guitar enthusiasts are basically cosplaying American guitar players, whether it be huge stars or more niche players. But we're fascinated, and we're finding it quite hard to get over that fascination of getting the same gear as X or Y, and getting that pedal that will get us that sound, and not even wondering if we want that sound in the first place, just because it's such it's so ingrained in our way of looking at things that we're I think it's maybe imposter syndrome that we see ourselves as not competent enough that we would choose our own sound. So basically, if that worked for John Mayer or Stevie Ray Vaughan, it's probably going to work for me, and which is a bit sad, but I think that's most people's way of looking at things. And on the other hand, there are a few artists, incidentally, a lot of female artists, which I think has its importance as well, that are trying to come up with a new way of doing things, and maybe less referential and differential to what's came before, but still conscious of what that music could be and can be, and bringing it to its not future form but present form, which is already a feat in itself. So yeah, there are the two aspects that are very present, but I think those those type of real artists that I mentioned will mostly play either quite cheap instruments because they don't care about the aspect of things, or purpose-designed instruments, and that's where the big French luthier scene comes in, which is a very interesting scene that I love to be part of in my own way. And the other population, if I may say, is mainly cosplaying with the big brands, the custom shops, and the indie replicas, and some of them the real vintage. They can if they can afford that luxury.
Well, you can't reenact with something new.
Yeah. Well, apparently you can.
Well, but it's not reenacting then, it's creating, right?
Well,
and so if you're going
I would argue that
to reenact or cosplay, to dress up as something, you're reenacting a moment in this costume play. You know, even when you see things that look futuristic, like the Japanese culture dressing up and doing cosplay with the sort of manga, sort of comic book ideas, it looks futuristic. They're still reenacting something they already know, and they have to look a particular way and move in a particular way and act in a particular way to reenact it. And so I don't have a problem with this at all. As a matter of fact, the majority of every market is a reenactment, because there's the majority of people in general, sort of if we look at the uptake of cultural movements and products, you know, that sort of middle 70%, the early majority and late majority, they won't do something new until the first sort of 16-70% of the population has fully accepted it. They just won't take it on.
Right.
And so as a result, if you have to have a certain percentage of the population, 16.5%, if the Harvard professor, which is generally cited, is correct, then it means that they're always a bit behind the curve, right? The acceptance curve, the uptake. And as a result, the mass market will generally be following and a reenactment of something.
Right.
You have to go to the bleeding edge of it to have something different. But those people are creating, not reenacting. And that's the same everywhere. It's the same in North America. They're not all innovators everywhere. It's still the same, what is the math on it? I think 2.5% innovators and then 13.5 early adopters.
Right.
The people who are trying that new thing, who were invigorated by it. But most people don't know what to do with it. They need to be shown. It's not. I don't mean like. I'm at the risk of saying that people are like babies and need to be told what to do. Like some sort of fascist dictator. That's not what I mean at all. I just mean that they're not stimulated by the novelty. Which goes back to the early part of our conversation. They don't want to stand out. They want to be safe within culture. And they want to do the things that are safe to do so that people will like them, so that people don't make fun of them, these things. And as a result, they wait for that first 16% of people who are okay with being made fun of or being pointed out to sort of normalize it before they get into it. And so that's perfectly normal in absolutely everything. And of course, that first 35% in the early majority often says, "Oh, I liked them all along." Maybe you did, maybe you didn't.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about you, is that you're always on the cusp of sounding kind of high horsey, but never quite going there. And I think that's probably down to your good looks as well. But that's a topic for another day. But I think, well, first of all, I'm not immune to that at all. Like I love instruments of the past. I love the stories that they tell, and the stories that the music tells, and that's an important foundation to be conscious of. But being conscious of that foundation shouldn't prevent you from taking them elsewhere or taking them further. Because as you mentioned before, no instrument was actually designed for what it ended up being used as. And that's the musician part of our responsibility, I would say. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, I love some elements that would seem cosplay to a lot of people. Like I like to record my music in an actual studio on tape with a proper board, playing live with the other musicians, and mostly with non-electronic instruments, if that's even something that's relevant. But I think that there's still something about that method that can bring something new, actually quicker than working with the latest gizmo that will bring me the sound of yesterday. Because by definition, any fashionable gizmo has already been used by what you call the early adopters. Mm-hmm. So they've already taken what's to take from there. And I like to go for maybe tomorrow or even the morning of the day after tomorrow, and try to see what I can do with the stuff that's already there, that's not been done before. And I know that's a big statement, but yeah, that's all that's what I have in mind anyway when creating music, and I'm, I'll take as a badge of pride the fact that I'm not afraid of what people are going to think, mostly because I'm convinced and I think I'm right in that aspect that most people just don't care, and that's both liberating and terrifying thoughts. But I'll take it as liberating mostly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, so we negotiate who we are with the people around us. With that sort of feeling of who you care to insult, who you don't care if they're insulted. You know, like it's we soften our connection to somebody who we don't want to push away, or someone who we don't want to anger, or if it's someone we want to impress, we want to make sure we don't do something wrong, right? And there's people who we like, I don't need them in my life. It's okay if they don't like what I did. I don't have to. I'd be perfectly fine if I never saw them again. And so we adjust how we behave around these people and what that is. But there's a certain amount of rock and roll culture which I think is really attractive in the way that rock and roll is defined by rebellion. If you remove the rebellious aspect of rock music, you just don't have rock music. Mm-hmm. It's a core tenet of what it is.
Yeah.
So a number of years ago, I was in one of these vintage stores, which we sometimes go to on tour at the Boutique Guitar Showcase, because sometimes the owner is an innovator. The owner is actually an entrepreneur and quite forward thinking. And so I connect with the owner and we become colleagues and we get along fine.
Right.
Ultimately, I often find out that their customers are not necessarily innovators, or because they've created a space to come and do this sort of cosplay, this cultural reenactment. And that's what those customers want. They don't want to explore something different. And I remember one of the young staff members, and I think that also we have the stereotype of young people are more open and young people are more, future forward. But there was a relatively young staff member there who sort of looked at a guitar with the Boutique Guitar Showcase, obviously a guitar that they could not picture a moment of reenactment with. And they said, this isn't a rock guitar. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's.
I know you're
that's
laughing. Hang on. I looked at him and said, you have no fucking idea what rock is if you think that any guitar is not a rock guitar.
Right.
Hand me any guitar in this shop. The least rock guitar you think of, I will fucking rock that guitar. It's not the guitar, man. It's you.
Yeah. A ukulele can be a fucking rock guitar if you want it to be.
Yeah.
And
that moment at the beginning of This Might Get Loud with Jack White with the fucking 2x4 and a screw and a string.
Yeah.
Jack is the rock, not the guitar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's I mean, I'm all for that, and I have so many things to say because of you, but that sales guy was probably trying to prove himself and trying to show what kind of a player he is and what kind of a guitar player he wants to be, and I've seen that, and we've all been guilty of that. Again, I really don't want to think of myself as on some kind of very small mountain above the flock, but we've all been poo-pooing some instruments because they're not good enough or not worthy of our attention, and that defines the kind of player that you are. But of course, we've all been polarized by some great debates among gearheads, like relic or not relic, amp simulator or tube amp, and all those things will define who you are as a player and a guitar enthusiast. And I think that's just bullshit. I think we should never forget. I've just written I've just published a guitar method. guitar method, because I'm not the greatest shredder, but I've learned some things along the way that are worth passing on, I think. And my conclusion is that we should never forget the word, the expression itself is playing the guitar. And I think the very word playing is paramount in that aspect. And interestingly enough, it's the same in German. It's Gitarre spiele. In French, is jouer de la guitare. So it's the very same sentiment that's behind it. And in Spanish, it's tocar la guitarra. So it's actually to touch the guitar. And I think those two are really defining what's exciting about the guitar experience. It's a game, and it's sensual. It's a sensory experience. And I think it doesn't matter if you're playing a Kiesel through a Kemper or a Relic Strat through a vintage Tweed Deluxe. What matters is that you're having fun in the meantime, that your playtime is satisfactory, and that your sensory experience is satisfactory. And I think that's what brings us together as a community, that we all deep inside have that secret knowledge that this is the most fun you can have with your clothes on. And I'm deeply convinced of that. And so that's one thing. The other thing is, yes, the spirit of rock is something that deeply matters. And I think I was actually talking to a guy that was interviewing me for the alumni magazine of my former school, and we were discussing what's sorry, I lost my train of thought there. We were discussing whether rock was becoming a music for museum and awards ceremony and all that, or whether it was a lively form of expression. And first of all, I think rock is to be understood in the broadest possible sense of basically all music derived from the blues. So I think R&B is rock, blues is rock. I think to a certain extent, hip hop is rock, and the two have been very closely intertwined in many ways, and just because they're the same sentiment. And secondly, I think some bands are really keeping that flame very much alive. There are many examples. I'm thinking of the Last Dinner Party, the Viagra Boys, bands like that are still have that attitude. And I think the contrarian aspect is a very big part of that. And I'll definitely plead guilty to that. I'm extremely contrarian to the point of hindering some of my social relationships. I really hate to have the exact same opinion, whether that's the exact same opinion that I think most people have, which usually they don't, but that's another debate, or the exact same opinion that the people I'm talking to directly have. If I'm agreeing with them, it will be on my own terms and in a slightly different way than they come about it, if that makes sense to you.
Of course. Otherwise, one of you isn't necessary. What's the point of a conversation if you both have the exact same opinions and have the same perspective on life? I mean, you should just not be talking to each other at that point.
Well, yeah. Well, some people have definitely arrived at that point, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's the strange thing about this cultural moment in the West, where we have said there's words that we cannot say. This sort of this very strange moment where the extreme self-defined liberals are imposing restrictions on language is absolute madness to me, because if we can't talk about the things that we disagree upon because we can't use the words to talk about them, we can't solve anything. Like, what the hell else is worth talking about except for the things that we don't agree about, right? And so if you stop us from being able to have those conversations, stop us from being able to use particular words because someone's feelings might get hurt, well, honestly, that might feel okay for the moment, but the outcome of not sorting things out is way worse than the awkward feeling in the moment. Like, we have to be able to talk about things. And so this sort of idea that even when you're talking to someone who you mostly agree with, that you offer something a little bit different is just interesting conversation and necessary for our development.
I think there are two sides to that. I'll agree with you on the long term, on the long run. That like banishing some words or concepts, because words are concepts. They don't exist. They don't exist in thin air. They carry their own load of layers of meanings. Banishing those words will just make the oppression behind them invisible. So they will, in the long run, make it harder to fight that oppression, I think. And that's a very valid point. On the other hand, I'm quite okay with a short, defined moment in time of just signaling that saying some things is just not okay, and I would agree with that way of seeing things, that some people have to be maybe more careful about how they phrase things, or just more aware of the experience that the person in front of them are going through and are living through. But that's just basic empathy. But I think that's something that most people will feel anyway. But basic empathy, will lead us to kind of tread a little more carefully, and of course it doesn't have to be a minefield, but a little care is never wasted, I think.
Well, of course, but we're at a strange time in our culture where we're weaponizing empathy.
Yeah.
And we're shutting things down because empathy is the highest order. And frankly, empathy cannot be the highest order. It is necessary, but it cannot be the highest order. Because, if you let your child just do anything, you're a father, I'm a grandfather. My grandson is here visiting me. They're out for a walk right now, so they don't interrupt the podcast. But, they have to understand there's things they can't do. Right. If you just make empathy the first order, and make anything that might make them feel uncomfortable or unpleasant for a moment, we get total chaos. There's this sort of, on one stream, we have total order. And if we move from order into total liberation, then total liberation is untethered from order and it's total chaos, right? And so we have this tension somewhere between chaos and order. And that's the democratic system, right? The democratic system is this opposing opinions where we find this tension, and the liberals' function is to get rid of the things that are maybe unnecessary or holding us back or maybe even hurtful, right? So to liberate, to be willing to move on and free ourselves from the old ways. That is the liberal function.
Sure.
The opposite side of that is the conservative function. And the conservative function wants to conserve the things that matter to us, the things that are our culture, the things that we care about, the things that are worth keeping because we need some order for safety. We're not just roaming the land dealing with bears and lions anymore. There's order installed, which gives us a good amount of safety. And so there's this tension that happens between total liberation and total order, because total conservation is stagnation, and stagnation, ferments and it turns in a bad way. We don't need that either. This space is normally reserved for brands who make stories like this possible, like D'Addario and the Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop. If your company belongs in this conversation, let's talk. We partner with brands who value craft, culture, and the quiet power of a well-placed idea. So we have this moment of liberation where we move, but if we become completely untethered from what we knew, then we're in chaos. And so, Hegel observes this sort of idea that the thesis, let's call that what is and what has been, the conserved moment, that generates its own antithesis or antithesis. So the total liberation, let's say, of that moment. And that together, the two create a synthesis, the synthesized thesis. The thesis, the antithesis, the synthesized thesis. I'm saying those words strange to emphasize the point, right? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And that synthesis is that point where the liberals have successfully moved us forward, but the conservatives said, not that far. I'm not willing to, hey, there's a baby in that bathwater. Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, is the phrase we sort of have. And so we make this feeling of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, is this thing that Hegel observes. And so, but that new synthesis becomes the thesis that generates its own antithesis. So we had this forward momentum moving forward. And we see this in culture. We see this in products. 100 years ago, we were still debating as to whether we should share sidewalks and water fountains with people of different skin colors. And now we all think that's absolutely insane, right? So that's that's evidence of the forward momentum on the long arc of time, right?
Well, yeah.
But in the moment, it doesn't feel that way.
Do you really think that, I'm unfortunately not so sure that some people don't, I think some people don't see it as insane as the thing they do. And that's the problem I have with the synthesis aspect of it all, because, well, we're pussyfooting in a very French Canadian way, but right now I feel like a lot of U.S. politics is whether whether you're racist or woke, and of course I'll take woke any day, but it's going to be hard to synthesize those two, if you will. And
it's the same in France.
Well, yeah, we're getting there, unfortunately.
Oh, come on, you're fully there. I've been in your cities with the protests, and and so let's take this into the arena of something a little more comprehensive and a little less sort of existential. I mean, you're in the heart of existentialism, and so culturally speaking, the French are very comfortable with the existential crisis. Matter of fact, you might always live in this moment of it. So for people who haven't been to France, I remember my mother, I was visiting Paris with my wife many years ago. And my mother's all like concerned. Like, there's a riot in Paris. I've heard there's a riot. Jamie, you shouldn't be going there. I'm like, Mom, there is always like some section of Paris where the police have contained an area and someone's upset and there's a protest happening that day. And I mean, it gets worse or, it's different. But the idea of not going to Paris because there's some sort of protest and that the police are standing by, you could just never go to Paris. And that doesn't mean that Paris is a very dangerous city. Yeah. But the French have a very comfortable relationship with political protest in a way that others don't. I was there on tour for the Yellow Jacket protest a number of years ago. I was on tour at the Guitar Showcase. Honestly, I wasn't paying attention to international news. I was just following my GPS. And we get out on the road, and we had just been in Switzerland. And I get stopped in this small town, and we're just waiting and waiting. It's what's going on? I don't understand what's going on. And we eventually see, okay, there's protesters at the traffic circle, and we can't get through this town that we're trying to go. Basically, probably I just saw you the day or two before in the Paris region, and then I was headed to Italy for our next event. And so I'm driving down through Lyon and Dijon and this sort of area towards Mont Blanc, and And we finally make it up to our turn to get through the traffic circle. And some French protesters come up with a clipboard. And they say, we want you to sign I said, I'm Canadian. They're like, it doesn't matter. Okay. And we're traveling in a big motorhome. You've seen it. We're traveling in a big motorhome full of guitars and a team of people. We've got a videographer and staff with me. And next thing you know, someone else joins the guy with the clipboard and says, hey, you've got a caravan. Yeah. Do you have a bottle opener? Like, yes. So we get the wine opener, he uncorks wine, and then proceeds to pour us all a glass and hand it in. I'm in the driver's seat. I'm getting poured alcohol in a French protest. People think protests are very dangerous places, and they can be, but don't assume they are going to be, actually, because I think they're often quite organized and they're kind of having a party at the same time. And so I was poured I took a sip and passed on to the rest of the crew just to be polite. I signed my name, I think, as Paul Stanley that day, you know, and so I could get through, and we carried on. That was not the last time I was stopped that day, and it was not the last time I was offered a drink. Next time, it was my first pastis. I'd never had a pastis before. Nice. And so there's this thing about French culture which is very comfortable with protesting and disagreeing and the crisis, let's say, that I've observed as a foreigner anyways.
We have a very festive way of beheading our leaders. Let's just put it that
way. Wow, that's a new danger to your smile that I've never seen before, Julien.
Well, it's just what the Americans call checks and balance, but we're extremely attached to it, and maybe we see through the fog slightly more clearly when the whole political circus is not up to par with what it should be and what it should do. And unfortunately, we're in that moment right now where the solutions that are offered are not satisfactory, and not the people are not up to snuff with what the situation would call for, and most of what we see these days is fear mongers and apocalypse dwellers and people that want to impose the thought that if we don't go their way, the only alternative is the end of times, and fortunately, I think there's still something of the French spirit that's not ready to accept it. I want to think that there's still some traces left. Paging Dr. Freud, some traces left of what happened during World War II. That a few French people were ready to sacrifice everything in order to fight against what didn't seem right to them, and what ultimately turned out to be the ultimate wrong, if there's such a thing, and I believe there is. So there's something to the French spirit of not completely giving up on the kind of hope, and I think that's the festive aspect that you experienced during the Yellow Jacket movement. Overall it was a very hopeful movement, and unfortunately it didn't lead to too much, and didn't amount to much in the long run, because we have a president that has a habit of not hearing what the people say, but I think that was a nice demonstration of what brings people together, and the way people can feel a sense of togetherness when they can agree that some things are just worthy of finding hope in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's that tension between the what to conserve and what to liberate, and
sure.
We do that in everything, and then we define it, and then we characterize it, As a matter of fact, I don't often tell canned jokes, but I recently read a joke which defines the element of categorization and conservative. Mm-hmm. So, I think many people know that to call it champagne, it has to come from the Champagne region of France.
For sure.
And otherwise, it's known as sparkling white wine. Mm-hmm. Right? With many different names. We call it Prosecco here in Italy. But anyways, so that's a way of conserving what is authentic champagne. Is we identify it, we put rules on it to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure someone's going to take issue that someone is not making authentic champagne within the Champagne region. Nonetheless, theoretically, this is the idea. And I heard someone take a play on this with existentialism the other day. And they said, actually, an existential crisis has to come from the existential region of France. Otherwise, it's actually just sparkling anxiety.
That's very good.
I love that. Well, not mine.
I would argue that you can find the traces of that French anxiety everywhere you go, because we've been colonizing left and right, so we left traces of existential dread pretty much everywhere we went, and
the writing. The writing of people like Foucault that were exported around the Western world, exported. One of France's great exports is existentialism at this point.
It's dread. Yeah,
it's dread. Thank you for that, by the way.
We've been selling dread for ages now.
Love it. So let's pull this back into the familiar topic of the guitar for a second, because here we are in a moment of actually existential crisis within the guitar industry. So from my observations, looking at the large movements of the guitar, which would relate to some of the things you're talking about in the book you're creating, I think, is that the objects are related to the culture, and it's the culture that sustains the object, or the value of the object, let's say, and that the culture itself has a shelf life, a period in time in which it can exist, because the people who experience the moment, who carry the narrative, most of them will cease to exist, as we have already talked about in this conversation. And so the memories of what made it so significant will die with them. Mm-hmm. A certain amount of it will be passed on through narrative, through people like yourself writing a book about it, through myself, or particularly George Gruen, who knows a great deal about the history of the guitar. I'm usually more about the future of it. But for me to understand what to expect in the future, I have to understand something about the past of it, right? The history mm-hmm. of it. And so what I see right now is the closing of a major movement. If we're talking about an artistic movement, the Nouveau movement is closing, and we've moved into Deco, at this point in time. And Deco is still younger, but Nouveau has said everything it has to say. It's been explored. We're not building any more French subway stations, mm-hmm. so there's no more Nouveau signs. I love that about Paris, this sort of Nouveau style on all your old subway entrances,
right.
And so it's not sad. It's just we explored an idea. We explored an idea as much as it could be explored, and eventually we sort of say, we've kind of said everything there's to say about that. We've seen mm-hmm. enough of it. And let's explore some new ideas. And that moment right now is happening in the guitar in a big way. And it has some substantial consequences, because there is a industry built around that. You and I both operate within that industry.
Sure.
And there are many retail stores that are going out of business at this point in time. Guitar companies closing, supporting adjacent products that no longer have the customer base that they need to support itself. There are changes happening culturally, how we even play the instrument, which is going to affect these things. Something I've not heard people really talking about so much. But if you watch almost anybody on YouTube playing a guitar right now, they're sitting in a gaming chair. We call them office chairs, but they're gaming chairs to the next generation. And they don't have a strap on.
Yeah.
I don't know what the impact of the guitar strap industry is going to be, because people now play sitting down. And that's laughable. It's funny to a certain extent, but not if you own a guitar strap company. It's not funny.
For sure.
Right? Yeah. Right? And so there's going to be all these changes. And so there's this moment of decline and destruction. But, as Schumpeter indicated, there's a creation happening there also. The destruction is because...
Destructive creation, yeah.
Yeah. And so, they might be playing a Kemper or a Neural DSP instead of playing a tube amplifier, and their neighbors are much happier. Because everyone wants to have an amplifier themselves, but nobody's neighbor wants you to have an amplifier. If you live close together. And drums went through the same thing. Digital drums went on the rise because drums are irritating if you don't know how to play. And there's a long period of when you suck that happens before you start making real music on a very loud drum set. And so there's this moment of decline, but there's this incredible moment of growth right now. And you've heard me say it many times because we've done so many events together that, I love where we've been, but I'm excited about where we're going. So I'm like, what's happening next? What are we doing? And so being in a reenactment culture, I think that France is probably a few years behind what's happening in North America, as is much of the European guitar market will be slightly behind, just because there's an uptake that happens over time. Rabbits hit their peak one year, foxes it's the next year. So, what are you looking at this? What is your perspective on this sort of what I think is a change? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you want to counter that? What do you think about my idea that we are closing a movement, but yet there's another movement on the rise, and what that means for the people who care about the guitar and the music created with it?
So, yeah, of course I want to counter that, but I really can't. But but my contrarian mind is looking for arguments right now. No, all kidding aside, I think it's less brutally perceived in France. I think a lot of stores are closing, and that's obviously very worrisome. I think it's also a lot of stores closing naturally, so to speak, which is to say the owners are retiring and not being replaced, which I think is could be a bad thing if that means lesser people are going to learn how to play and pick their first instrument, which could be the role of many of those smaller shops. I don't necessarily think that's the case because, well, first of all, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but a lot of those stores that closed kind of had it coming, and I know how much of an asshole I'm sounding like right now, but a lot of them were guilty of not welcoming people the way they should have, not keeping up with trends the way they should have, not keeping up with prices as well, but that's also down to importers and distributors not really allowing them to keep up with prices the way they should have. And the stores that I see that are not closing or that are even thriving, are usually secondhand stores, and I think that's a big part of the invisible market that's really thriving these days is secondhand. And I was talking to someone in the industry a week ago, and he was telling me that the first store that sells fenders in France is what we call Le Bon Coin, which is basically our equivalent of Craigslist, and that's in volume. It's the first Fender reseller in France. The second one would be Thomann, obviously, which is the European juggernaut that we all know. But
the Sweetwater of Europe, we could say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Pretty much, but better because it's European.
German systems.
Yeah, exactly. It works.
Yeah.
I think secondhand, the resurgence and thriving of secondhand is quite interesting because it shows that maybe people are not as uptight as they used to be about their instruments having a few dings and scratches there and then. I think it might also show concern about the environmental impact of our industry. Is there a point yet of tearing down trees to make guitars, or is that just a thing of the past? Is that still relevant? Is that just cosplaying? Do we really need mahogany and rosewood on every guitar that we build, or is that just a reflex from a time gone by? And I think secondhand is also a sign. The success of secondhand is also a sign that a lot of bigger brands are really hitching up their prices to a point that's really getting completely out of hand. I'm thinking of obviously the big two, and the prices of a brand new Strat or a brand new Les Paul these days are getting them into a territory that's either a great custom shop used or a boutique instrument. That's another proposition altogether. But those two, custom shop used and boutique, used to be so further up the price range that they were considered as another market altogether, or unattainable to the average Joe. But nowadays, big factory brands have hitched up their prices so much that the difference between these two is almost none nowadays. So I think that also explains the success of secondhand. And last thing that I see happening very often in secondhand stores, and which is an aspect that might give the advantage to stores, even to over Craigslist type sites, is trading guitars. Because I've been working in a store, Guitar Village, which has been going on for 25 years now, and they basically thrive by trading instruments. Not a lot of people can just shell out 6,000 on a custom shop or boutique instrument. Most of us have to look at our guitar collection and consider which one or which ones are gonna just have to go away in order for the new one to exist. So I think that's also a sign of the times that should be taken into consideration. And as far as making music is concerned, I'm not worried that this might become more of a niche thing. I think the notion that rock is a mainstream music was flawed from the beginning. As you said, the spirit of rock is contrarian. So I'm not sure it was designed to be. I'm not sure it was supposed to be mainstream from the get-go. So if it goes back, if it reverts back to being a niche music for people that truly enjoy it, I'm all for that. I just don't want it to be a music for old people reenacting their glory days, because that's just going to be a sad room there. And I've seen that before. I've seen, for instance, Robert Plant or Jeff Beck playing to audiences that in their majority were about twice my age, and it shows both on the enthusiast of the crowd and also very much significantly on the prices of the tickets, and and I think that's obviously the wrong way to go about it. But on the other hand, I've seen Jack White in many smaller rooms, and I think that's where his music thrives. I wouldn't imagine him playing to a crowd of 40,000, and I'm not sure he would be happy there or at his best there. And I'm pretty sure the spirit of rock is very much alive in those situations. And when it comes to gear, I think the way forward is not necessarily the way we think of forward, or the way we're sold as forward. Let me clarify myself there. I don't necessarily think plugins or amp simulations are the way forward. For now, most of what I see those amp simulators or plugin doing is just simulating, as the name very clearly implies. So actually imitating and presenting a lesser version, because it has to be a lesser version, because it's just an emulation. It cannot be better than the real thing by definition. So presenting a lesser version of what is already there. And I've owned my fair share of simulators, and I work with plugins every now and then. But first of all, don't have the same fun and enjoyment as I have with the immediacy of an amp. And more to my point, I don't find them flexible enough to be able to accompany musicians towards the future of our instrument. That might seem like a paradox, but I think amp simulators and plugins are designed for a particular use, and will have a very hard time going out of that designed use, whereas traditional amps have been designed for a use that they were not used for anyway from the start, and nowadays can be used in all sorts of different ways. Let me use a very concrete example. For instance, I have all those funny boxes behind me, and a lot of what those do is add a shit ton of gain to the signal. Like, for instance, a vintage fuzz or a very extreme EQ that will boost the mids by 20 or 30 dB is not something a simulator really enjoys. Most of them don't like their input level to be different from the actual pickups of the guitars. And of course, they have simulated versions of all the things, but the interaction between those two elements is nothing more than the simulated results, as opposed to the actual process of the sound being created. And I think I like to create a sound that is unique to the moment that I'm creating the music as well, and that's what analog gear. If I think analog is seen as a polarizing word those days, so I'm sorry for using it.
I think that you're within the culture where you can say analog gear, we get what you're talking about, and so I think that's okay. But Julien, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I can relate to a lot of it. But I think that we often mistake the correlation and the cause, or the disease and the symptom, let's say. And to invoke the spirit of Harold Egerton here, he says, nobody wants a drill. They want a hole.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Nobody gives a damn about your drill. They need a hole. And I'm recording this right now with an iPhone in continuity cam. So I'm looking at an iPhone, and one day my son Zach and I just pulled out the whiteboard. I always have a whiteboard around, large ones, a couple meters long. And we started thinking of all of the products that have gone away and all of the industries that were disrupted by the iPhone. My son is an avid photographer. He collects cameras. If we go on a trip, like we were walking around Vatican City in Rome a few months ago, he had multiple old vintage analog cameras on him. Not one, multiples, right? I take pictures primarily on my phone. I have a pro version of the iPhone. I have a good one that has multiple lenses and great software and all of this. But nonetheless, I don't really care that much about the camera. Zach does. I care about the photograph. And I get the photograph, and I get the good quality image here from there. Could I get a better quality image if I bought a Hasselblad or a Leica or the latest Canon or Sony camera with amazing lenses, great lighting? Yes. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Do I want to carry around all this stuff? Do I want to fly around the world with it? Do I want to rent a bigger car every time I have to travel somewhere because I have to have all that gear with me? We film almost everything on a set of iPhone 15 Pros. Everyone on my team has one. Roberta has one. Zach has one. I have one. Therefore, we have 3 angles. We have little Bluetooth-enabled microphones that capture it. We haven't traditionally traveled with lighting, although now I insist we travel with lighting. But again, they're small Amaran, high quality, but very functional, small pieces that include batteries if you want them to, because there's a certain amount of effort that goes into this. And the reality is, you don't want the sound of that pedal. You want the sound of that pedal with that amplifier, with that guitar, with that microphone in the right spot through the right system. But when we did the tech check for this, you showed me what that microphone was plugged into, and it's not a Neve console, and they're not 2 compressors. You have a much more compact, much easier to use digital recording system because it takes up less space, it's less money, it does the job maybe even better, and so there's this idea of, do we want the drill? Do we want the hole? And in the case of cameras, my son likes taking photographs, but frankly, I think he's obsessed about the object of the camera, maybe more so than he is about the idea of creating photographs. And one could accuse me of the same thing. My obsession is the object of the guitar and its function and what we do with it and the music we make. I play guitar. I've spent much of my life. I used to walk my dog with a guitar when I was a kid. I was totally obsessed with the guitar. But these days I spend more time thinking about the object than I actually spend time playing and making music on the guitar. And so, anyways, I said a lot.
As a guitar builder and a player, you have a sense for when something's working right. That's why so many of the world's best trust D'Addario. Unmatched tone, perfect intonation, and strings made to the tightest tolerances in the industry. That reputation is no accident. It's the result of 400 years of being obsessed with quality and innovation. D'Addario, when you know, you know.
Let's just sort of for a moment look at that and say, all right, so we have this, what we call them, I'm sorry, Kemper Neural DSP, they are...
Simulators.
Thank you, simulators. Yeah. I'm not in the Matrix. Real error. So we have these simulators, and most young people these days will probably never own a tube amplifier, maybe never own an amplifier at all. They're going to be playing into their computer system and they're going to hear it here. But how do they experience music? You know what we don't hear anymore? This was synonymous with young people listening to rock music for decades. And it was this phrase, turn that shit down. And that was your parents yelling at you to turn your music down. You know what doesn't happen anymore? Nobody even knows what the kids are listening to. They've all got headphones on.
Yeah.
Right? And so they're used to hearing music in that space. And the most efficient way to get a guitar tone that sounds like the stuff that's actually being played to you in your headphones is by going through a simulator directly into your computer, into the headphones you listen to all your music on.
So, let me answer on all those accounts because there's so much to unpack there. First of all, let's not speak of the youngsters as we know them because we're not youngsters. But
it's observations. It's me seeing how it is and talking to friends, and the friends are saying, "Yeah, I actually don't know what they're listening to because they always have headphones on." Whereas at a certain point in time, you could walk past, a teenager's room. You know what they're listening to because it was shaking the door. You could hear what was happening there, and actually we're somewhat isolated from those experiences. But then extrapolate that to understanding how they were experiencing the music, and they are experiencing it through a set of headphones. And we're talking in generalities, of course. We're not talking about everyone in the world. We're talking about the general populace.
Well, what they're listening to is usually porn. That's what they're not telling you.
Corn, like monkey in the head.
Yeah, exactly. That type of youngster music. From my experience, a lot of young people are also interested in tube amps and analog gear. I get a lot of messages from those people. Of course, those that are going to write to me know my reputation. So obviously I'm going to be biased in that those that are into that are going to write to me rather than somebody else. But from what I see, a lot of them are also jamming at places that have actual beat up tube amps. A lot of them are rehearsing in rehearsal spaces that have beat up tube amps, and I think they can navigate that and understand what those amps can do as opposed to simulators, and most of them are smart enough that they can take what's good from both of them and not be judgmental about the thing they're using. To your point about the drill and the hole, I think you don't need to be inspired to drill a hole, and that's the huge difference with what we're doing. I don't care about the hole. I don't care about my sounds, so to speak. I don't care about the music I'm recording, because that's the end results. I care about the process. I care about having fun in the process. I don't want to get things done. That's terrible. I hate when things are done because I love doing them. Art is never done anyway. The Mona Lisa is still unfinished to this day, and it's gonna remain this way. And I think art should be unfinished. It should be abandoned by its creator for other people to enjoy, but it's never done. And I don't want a product that's going to help me get quicker to the end result, because I don't care about the end result. I the end result is of no interest to me. And of course, I'm exaggerating by saying that, but there's a whole lot of truth to that, at least from my point of view. I don't want to get things done. I just want to do things. And from that point of view, I think tube amps are more fun because they create a unique process. I want to have problems doing what I do. I want to encounter obstacles. I want to find sounds that I haven't found before, just because the battery in my fuzz is dead, so I have to use another one. Just because one tube is kind of a little off in my deluxe, so it fizzes in a way that it's never gonna fizz again. I think the best guitar parts I've ever recorded were amps on the verge of dying, and that's a sound that you can, of course, emulate with a simulator. But what's the fun in that? You don't smell the solder. You don't have that weird is it gonna burn the studio down or not attitude to it, or all that fun stuff that's part of the process. And I think that's the big difference with the drill and the hole. With the drill and the hole, you want the result. With the music, you want the process, and you want the fun in the process. And I think the simulator is helping us getting faster to a result by bypassing the whole point of the process.
It's an interesting perspective.
And also,
you kind of remind. I picture you making an ice cube in the Old West, like Christopher Lloyd in Back to the Future 3, where he's built this machine the size of a locomotive engine. That all these pipes are going off, and these cranks are turning, and all this noise is being made, and Marty's yelling at him, and he can't hear what he's saying, and finally the machine shuts down, and 2 ice cubes spit out into a bowl.
Right, yeah.
And Doc's like, iced tea, Marty?
and that's,
it's this,
yeah.
Yeah, but you couldn't fit it in your apartment.
But that's probably but there are studios for that. And that's probably the best iced tea you'll ever taste, because of the process that got you to make it that way. I know I appreciate music differently when I had fun doing it, or when the process was interesting unto itself. I mean, all the classic, all the great albums we still look up to were usually made in either very complicated conditions, or not necessarily complicated, but took a lot of time and soul searching to make, and usually were made against all odds. At least to most of the classic albums were not supposed to be classic albums when they came out. And I think that says a lot about what makes music interesting. I think music or art more generally thrives when it comes from a process that's resisting you. Also, and that's what frightens me about simulators and plugins, is that we're depriving ourselves of the possibility of a mistake or a happy accident. I think a lot of sounds would not have emerged had it not been for a drunk engineer putting the mic in the wrong spot, or a guitar just going completely out of tune right before the solo was recorded, and the solo would not have sounded that way with a perfectly in-tune guitar. Well, there are countless examples of that, and I think we as humans respond to that as well. And there's something irreplaceable also about the process of all musicians working in the same room at the same time towards a common goal. I think that's something you feel when you're listening to an album, and that cannot be emulated.
I agree with many things that you said, and I too am a romantic. And so there's the artist side of me that gets 100% what you're talking about. I am a journey, not a destination guy as well. I intentionally make my life in ways where the journey is something worth doing and enjoyable. And it's not about getting it done. It is about having a good life, and creating. And I also agree. I am someone who builds inefficiency into my life so that I can savor the moment more.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I live in a medieval town here. I'm in a 15th century building here, and there's no parking. But actually, I've come to really enjoy the fact that I have to walk to go get the car when I have to drive, and I have to walk back. And otherwise I might not leave my office. I might be here writing something, making a video, doing something. And so for a year and a half, we didn't really have a kitchen here. The local restaurant owners actually called us no kitchen in Italian. They're like, hey, senza cucina. They thought it was hilarious that we didn't have a kitchen. But that was to make sure I left the office.
Right.
So I had to, and admittedly, food is so good and so inexpensive here in Tuscany that, it wasn't a huge cost for me to also go out and get some great food. So there's multiple incentives there, but I'm building in that inefficiency so that we have that. And as an artist, if we talk about, the designer's mind for a moment, the creatives in this sense. But when we talk about design thinking, you can't make truly great design without imposing limitations. You have to impose those limitations and give you a structure to then find solutions from. All great designers are excellent problem solvers. We're invigorated when we have a problem to solve, right? We want to figure it out. We want to wrestle through it and find the right resolution in the end. And so I get all of that. And, moments I can think of that I really enjoyed was a moment showing up on a gig. I think I was playing bass on this gig. I'm a multi-instrumentalist. And the drummer wasn't going to make it. Something happened. The drummer wasn't going to make it. But there was a keyboard player who could comp some bass lines.
Right.
And so my first instrument is actually drums. Problem is, there's a kit, there's a house kit with cymbals. I don't have a stick bag, and there's no drumsticks anywhere. There were a couple of microphone bags for the SM58s and with Velcro straps. And so I tightly rolled these microphone bags together and grabbed a metal water bottle and went out into the parking lot and filled it full of rocks and made myself a shaker and some stick bags. And it was a great gig. I played stuff that I never would have played otherwise because I had these limitations, and I had to, I'm not generally a nationalist, but one of the great senses of pride is that MacGyver is a Canadian TV show. And so I had to MacGyver my way out of this moment. And, the idea of having to play a drum gig on a drum set and there being nothing that resembles a drumstick around in the time to deal with it was a great moment. And there's the creative has to overcome the problem. And that's, I get it. I think that's a great deal of joy. Now, let me put my sort of economics hat on and talk about the observation that we will generally, take the path of least resistance and we'll take care of our own interests here, and that there are limited resources, that most people cannot afford to just have all the time and all the money in the world, right? And so they might like the idea of having $1 million Neve console in a studio and and all of these things, but the reality is they've got a less than a $1,500 budget, which gets them a MacBook Air and a Focusrite, little plug-in kit, and that's their studio. Right. And so there's somewhere between the ideal and what our resources allow us to have. And what I think is amazing is that our technology has brought us to the point where we can do something really remarkably good at a very low price these days. Mm-hmm. And we can do it almost anywhere. Remember, I don't have a place that I just stay in most of the time. So a record collection, a record player for me would just be something I just wouldn't have. Without Spotify, Jamie wouldn't really be listening to music. I travel with my iPhone and I have a $99 little Bose Bluetooth speaker that sounds fucking great if you know how to place it in a room. You know, because bass response is all about knowing where to stick that little speaker, right?
Choose your spot wisely.
Choose your spot wisely. And so it creates, so yeah, I love this history of it. I love having all of those things. I've owned lots of tube amplifiers, you know, I've had lots of drumsticks. There's a drum set in my living room. There's also an upright bass and an ukulele and a tube amplifier and all those things in my house in Canada. And I love those moments, but I also like the idea that I can pull out a laptop and a phone and I can record reasonable quality content anywhere I am in the world. And so, you know, again, I will say I love where we've been. I'm excited about where we're going. And this gives me possibilities. And I like possibilities. And I will intentionally limit myself, but I will also gladly take the route that makes it possible in the unlikely places.
Yeah, but that's well, first of all, you said I'm a romantic. Like that's something either you are or you're not as a musician. And I think being a musician or an artist is romantic unto itself. There are no non-romantic artists, even if they claim otherwise themselves. That's
people
not
who
for
play
them to
musical
decide.
instruments that I don't necessarily see as musicians. There's the act of playing an instrument, and there's making music.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
There's a lot of qualifiers in there, but I will accept it for the moment. Carry on.
What I'm saying is that well, as I've stated before, I don't think plugins or simulators are that forward-thinking and open up any new possibilities, so to speak, are not necessarily that I've heard of. Most of them are so focused on replicating the past with such accuracy that they forget about offering something different, because that would not be popular anyway. And as we see, to use a very recent example, there's that whole Tascam recorder fashion going on now with pedals that emulate that, and there'll probably be plugins emulating that very soon. But that's something that was created through an accident of analog gear, and by design, plugins and simulators are accident-proof, so to speak. It's very hard to find a faulty way or a wrong way of using them. And some people are true geniuses. Like I'm thinking of somebody like Bumblefoot, Ronthal, who's a dear friend, and on his latest album is tracked all the guitars through the Helix plugin, and using it to really create otherworldly sounds using pitch, delay, and several signal path at the same time. And that's I think that's a forward-thinking way of seeing things, but that's extremely rare. And he would have done it the same way with analog gear. It was just a matter of taking time to do it. But I think most people and the marketing of most plugins and simulators sells us realism, and I'm pretty sure realism is the way, a very backwards way of thinking of the gear we use, and that worries me a little. And also on your point of budgets, I think those digital propositions are quite expensive at the end of the day, and most of them are destined to be obsolete way sooner than their analog counterpart. A Neural DSP or Kemper or a Tonemaster Pro or a Helix, those are above $1,500 each, and you can get a very good amp and a very nice set of pedals for that price, and I don't think you'll ever need anything else.
Look at your background. How many dollars in pedals are on those 3 shelves?
Okay, there's
off your right shoulder.
Here's a little secret
just
for you.
A rough estimation as to how many. I don't care what you paid personally.
Yeah, exactly.
How many dollars are represented right there? Because I could probably make a phone call and get you a neural DSPA too. But
I traded most of them. But let me just say,
it is in excess of what a Helix or a neural DSP quad cortex is in those pedals.
But I would be extremely happy with a Blues Junior and a set of 5 or 6 Boss pedals. I could make a career with those. I could have an extreme lot of fun with those, and they would probably be all I need for creating even new sounds, because they still have some possibilities left in them, I think.
Yes, and we could all drive a Fiat Panda and be just fine, but we don't.
Not the same. As I said before, you don't need to be inspired to drive a car, and we don't want you to be inspired when driving a car. That would be a dangerous proposition.
I need to be inspired to survive driving through Paris, which I do every year in a motorhome. Remember, with these motorcycles whipping around me and.
I was going on and on in a very French way about the fact that simulators and plugins are the past rather than the future. And to my point, the 2 latest releases in that domain, I think that was last week. The latest update on Neural DSP is a Dumble emulation. And Universal Audio just released a plugin with a plugin version of their Enigmatic, which is also a Dumble. So there are trends like that. And funnily enough, I think what made Dumble interesting is not the fact that his amps sounded good, because of course they sound good, but they're interesting because they were all different and purpose-made for what the musicians were looking from them. And I think we're kind of missing the point by replicating Dumble amps as if they were a sound unto themselves, because they're not. They're just a way of looking at things, and there are many great amp builders nowadays that will do that exact same thing and take that exact same approach for you if you're willing to define who you are as a guitar player and make choices. I think that's a big point also about simulators and plugins. It's that they kind of avoid many choices that you should make, and art comes from the choices you make. That's all it is.
Yeah, I hear the same argument about using a PC versus an Apple computer. My friends who are really into the computer tech side of things like being able to modify their computer, but Apple makes a computer in a way that they don't allow you to fuck it up.
Well,
and so in that, it's not that they don't have any problems, but that's the sort of 2 ways of thinking about it, right? Where you have all this possibility to modify and work within things and create what could be perceived as a certain amount of chaos, and then another perspective where they're trying to make sure that the result is always a good result, which is enforcing a certain amount of order, but that removes the possibilities which you might consider to be creative expressions, which someone else might sort of see as just bad sounds.
Yes, but no. Again, you're using that same kind of analogy as you did with the drill and the hole, and when I'm using a computer, I'm not interested in the computer taking me down a wrong path and it bringing me a new idea. That just doesn't happen. I'm interested in it doing the task that I want it to do, and that's 2 ways of 2 very different ways of looking at things. I can hear, I can understand a musician wanting something that will do exactly what he wants to do. for instance, when you're playing in a cover band or a tribute band, you don't want any surprises. You just want to be able to download all the patches from all the U2 songs that you're gonna cover and poorly reproduce. But I'm pretty sure that there's no creative endeavor in that process.
There may not be. Not everyone is trying to create that. But the thing that.
But what's the fun?
So listen. I used to have a phone, and I had a separate thing we called a Palm Pilot, which allowed you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And I had a GPS, and I had a CD player, and now I just have an iPhone. Mm-hmm. And so, although what you're saying is absolutely true, and you have the right to do that. That's how you want to create. But there is a lot of value in being able to carry your Marshall, your Dumble, your Fender Deluxe, both blackface, silverface, tweed, have different microphones to choose to mic it with in different positions, with different cabinets, all in your pocket. And that's what someone like Neural offers. You can't carry around that much gear, Julien. And I remember going through this period. Maybe you like the chaos, but I remember in one of the bands I was playing where the guitar player was going through this. He had new gear all the time because he couldn't figure out the amplifier that could handle both his Les Paul Standard and his Stratocaster for what he was trying to do. And so some people have the money, the budget, the ability to then have two different amplifiers that you can then put them through because they can't handle it. But someone like Neural handles that. They handle it where you can switch to a completely different amplifier with a different cabinet. And then, so he would switch, so you get the preamp stage, right, the amplification stage, but then the amplifier part would be the problem, or the cabinet part would be a problem, And so we have all this mix and match, and I enjoyed having mix and match stuff also for certain environments until I found myself playing on a tour throughout Poland in like 2000, maybe 1999. 2000, somewhere around there, where Poland was still very much a developing nation, we would say, at that point in time. And you can't just assume that you get great gear. So the backline was always what they thought was good stuff, but they didn't have access to the same things that I was used to having access to in touring through North America. And so I'd show up and they'd be like, hey, we've got this really great rig for you. And I'd be like, man, am I ever glad that I brought this little Tech 21 device, which goes direct out to make sure that the random gear I'm going to get doesn't make sure my tone sucks tonight. I had to take control of it, and it had to be portable, and it had to sort of work. And so when I see people traveling with something like a Neural DSP Quad Cortex, as the example that I'm most familiar with, it's not because they necessarily think that they don't want to play through this gear, and this gear. But, when Corey Wong's on the road and Mark Lettieri, those guys doing like Fearless Flyer gigs or something sort of like that, they're traveling with Quad Cortexes because they can have a much better selection of gear and travel in a way they couldn't travel otherwise. The expenses get out of control, the effort gets out of control, and they still have good sounds at the gig that night. And so, I'm certainly not arguing that it's not enjoyable to play music through different gears and to have that certain amount of expression through unpredictable chaos. I enjoy that also. You've experienced Jamie on a tangent once or twice in your life. And musically, I enjoy tangential moments also. But I don't think we have to choose. I think that we get to have them both, and I'm very happy for that. Yeah.
Mostly, I think you're talking economics, and I'm talking fun, and that's two very different perspectives. I think if Corey Wong could afford to take his trusty Deluxe or Twin on tour, he absolutely would. And I think there's something to be said also about restraint and surrendering. You mentioned obviously the terrible backlines in Poland. I can imagine there were something like Gorilla amps, which were a big mainstay in the Eastern Bloc. Those solid state amps that were absolutely unusable.
No, I was getting like Pro Gear, but Pro Gear for them was an SVT3 Pro rack mount with no tubes in it. It said Ampeg SVT, no tubes in what was supposed to be an Ampeg with a Mesa Boogie cabinet. And it was just, for a bass player, that's just a very uninspiring setup, but it had big names attached to it, right? So they thought it was a great thing. And so
my point to that is that you mentioned the Tech 21 Lifesaver, and the thing about the Tech 21 is that it does one sound. I mean, it does all the sounds you need, but you only get one sound. It doesn't have any preset.
It was a simulator. It was kind of it was an analog simulator, but it also did simulation basically of, a flip top or an SVT or a SWR or something of the sort. And it had 2 channels in it. But nonetheless, the point is, it made the musical moment possible. Yeah, and I think that's part of what drives us, is that we create moments in which we can make music where other scenarios are not ideal. And today, I don't know that I would look forward to trying to carry an Ampeg refrigerator in and out of a gig. I would probably still choose something else.
My point to that is that you mentioned that it's nice to be able to bring a plexi and a tweed and a blackface, a silverface, all within the size of a computer. And I don't agree with that. I think it's selling us something that's not useful, and that's almost taking us the wrong way, or giving us the wrong impression of what a guitar sound should be. I have in the past, when I still had hair, let's put it that way.
You're very hairy, man. I can see it.
When I had hair in the right spot, I had
branches, not roots.
Yeah, exactly. I used to have a pod, the first version of the pod, and I remember switching from a Fender Blackface for the clean sounds to a Plexi for the rhythm sounds and a Soldano for the solo sounds, and sounding like utter shite in the process. Because
but that's like comparing a current MacBook Pro M5 to a Commodore 64.
No, let me explain. Let me explain what I'm worried about in that process. Is that when you're doing that, you're not just choosing the right amp for the part. You're completely changing the frequencies in which your sound lives. Mm-hmm. So basically, you're fucking up everything that the sound guy is trying to do, because the point of a guitar sound is to fit within a band mix. You've got the bass, you've got the kick drums, and on the other side, you've got the cymbals, which are on the upper end of the register, and you've got the voice of the singer, and you don't want to step on anybody's toes. And when you're switching from a blackface, which is very scooped in the mids, to a plexi, which has a higher mid presence than the blackface, to a Soldano, which is all mids in the middle, basically you're playing hide and seek with both the sound guys, the rest of the band, and the audience. And I think there's something to be said about us being able to bring only one amp to a gig and doing the sounds with it. I'm going to use a very unfair example, but I'm currently working on a lecture about The Who, and in the studio, Pete Townsend for Who's Next used a Gretsch 6120 into a Tweed Bandmaster, but on stage, he used high watt stacks and a Les Paul. And I don't think he was worried about getting the same sound that he would get on the Who's Next album. And when they played songs from Tommy, he wouldn't revert back to using the SG he was using at the time of Tommy. And I think that's mostly a problem we're creating for ourselves. We can play any song with the one sound we have if we're how can I put that? If we're competent enough to navigate it, and we don't need to switch from a JTM 45 to a Tweed Bassman just because that's what used on the original recording. And I think we're just creating obstacles and false needs and false problems for ourselves by doing that.
I mean, this from a guy who claimed to be OCD a moment ago. You know,
yes.
It's...
I contain multitudes, Jamie.
I think the Edge does keep all the gear with him that allows him to get the studio sounds, if we're talking about U2. And Brian May is so specific about himself as his amplifiers that he uses his physicist brain to put them on an extremely specific angle to each other with the microphones in an extremely specific angle to achieve his sound. You know, I have a friend who's a guitar tech in Europe who he doesn't work for Queen, but he works with Pet Shop Boys, and they were doing the same gig together. And the Pet Shop Boys tech was explaining Brian. He said, "You know what? Let me get someone who can explain it better." He goes back and brings out Brian May to explain why his amplifiers are set up this way. And Brian May loves to explain exactly why these amplifiers have to be on this particular angle, set up in relationship to each other with the microphones in this way to achieve. He said he's extremely specific about it for him, but he creates variation with his sound with a guitar that has all sorts of different dip switches in it and such. He gets great tones from what he does. And you just choose different areas. And so I don't think there's a right or wrong here. I like that you have that opinion. I like that I don't have to adopt your opinion. I like that I can visit the world of Julien for a few moments and I could play guitar or drums or bass in that environment and have a great time. And I also love the fact that I could plug into a neural DSP while the kids are sleeping and still rock out.
I play when the kids are sleeping, but usually I play my electrics unplugged. And I think that's a huge continent of sound that shouldn't be ignored.
Sure.
Playing with headphones can be quite insulating and also maybe dangerous because you don't realize how much volume you're putting in your ears. And I think there's something to be said about just hearing the unplugged resonance of an electric guitar. I mean, that's the romantic in me, but I like I like to hear the silence around me when I play the guitar.
Yeah, all sorts of possibilities. Julien, I don't think there's an end to this part of the conversation unless we impose one. So, I'm going to walk up to your imaginary amplifier and I'm just going to unplug your cable for a second. And that part of the conversation is going to be over. And I've enjoyed it. And thank you so much. Julien, we have to think about wrapping up at this point in time. And so, as is my way, I love to address that my guests probably have some level of expectation as to what we're going to talk about. And I always give them the last sort of topic. Is there something today that you had hoped to discuss that maybe we haven't covered today that we could still address so that you don't leave this interview feeling like, oh, that was a waste of time?
No, it's absolutely not a waste of time, and I went in places in my brain that will probably spark some other things. So definitely a conversation worth having, and as I think any conversation we've had in the past. So I didn't have other expectations than a great conversation, which I think we did. I think we should do another one where we get more into the weeds about the guitar itself, like the guitar as an object, as an instrument, as a product of an ecosystem of luthiers, which we're both familiar and in love with. And yeah, I think that's something we should be covering in the future.
Well, how about we plan that for this time next year when you're about to release your book, where you've written a lot of the topic and you've nailed down all of your arguments and observations, and I'll have a lot to learn from you, I'm sure. I'd love to see the perspective that way. So
that's a string I'm willing to attach.
Yeah. And before I forget to say this, and we could say it off air, but I'm going to say it on air anyways. The French influence on America. I recently had an experience with the guitar in the workshop of John Monteleone, where he had a good relationship with Macafari. And actually built a guitar with him also. And although Macafari is not a French name, of course, the most famous Macafari player is Django Reinhardt, who is a French speaker, Belgian. I understand he's not French. But it's part of the same sort of culture and ecosystem there musically. And I see a lot more manouche guitar in France than I see pretty much anywhere else that I go. And I see that influence, and I love that sort of gypsy jazz manouche sort of style. It's what's happening. And John Monteleone has the Selmer Macafari serial number directly after Django's.
Nice.
And spent some time with Stefan Grappelli, and there's a lot of interesting little bits sort of around that. And so I'm just going to throw that bone in your direction for when you're thinking about the influence of the American guitar, to think about maybe the cultural influence that French culture has had on the guitar and how that has influenced Americans as well, and American guitar makers like John Monteleone. So,
yeah, well, the manouche guitar is still at least the gypsy jazz way of playing is still something that's very present in your culture. I mean, most of what Americans think of as rockabilly is really a hybrid of manouche and the original rockabilly, by way of Brian Setzer, who's a huge Django freak. So that's a very important influence as well. People like John Jorgensen, which I've had the chance of talking to a few times, is extremely big into Django, and he's a monster of country music. So those two can also intertwine. I mean, it's endless, really, and the very foundation of America, of the U.S. as a country, has a lot to do with the French as well, with the French Revolution as well. I mean, American music is basically a hodgepodge of African music and European instruments. It's all a big mix up, and that's what's beautiful about it.
I agree. For another day, for another conversation. But I'm. That's a couple of wonderful nice insults, insights, Julien.
Yeah, the French are good at good insults. Yeah, a nice insult.
Thank you for the insights. I had never recognized a connection between rockabilly and manouche, and so I'll be thinking on that. For another day, though. Julien, thank you so much for being on Life with Strings Attached, for doing all that you do to explore the guitar and promote the guitar with your writing and your work throughout France and the rest of the world. I truly appreciate your contribution to the guitar and to what
My pleasure. Thank you. Right back at you, Jamie.
All right. Bye for now. Okay. You don't have to say goodbye. Most people listen. Peace out. Julien just Irish goodbye to all the Spotify listeners. I love it. Zach.
You've been listening to Life with Strings Attached. If today's conversation meant something to you, consider passing it on. These stories find their place through the people who share them. A new episode comes out every Friday, right here, wherever you're listening. I'm Jamie Gale, and thanks for listening to Life with Strings Attached.